Today, let's talk about a guy who lived one of the most daring, most unbelievable double lives in all of history. He was a card-carrying Nazi, a trusted German diplomat, and he was also Stalin's most important spy, operating right under the noses of the Third Reich. His name was Richard Sorge. Okay, so let's just start right here. This is what Joseph Stalin, the dictator of the Soviet Union, had to say about his own spy's intelligence. This was the warning he was getting about Hitler's imminent invasion. And that shocking dismissal, well, it would go on to cost millions of lives. So who was this bastard that Stalin just brushed aside? Well, the answer is a complete paradox. He was a German war hero, decorated with the Iron Cross. He was a passionate member of the Nazi Party. And all the while, he was secretly Ramsay, a colonel in Soviet military intelligence, and you could absolutely argue the most effective spy of the entire Second World War. So how does that happen? How does a man go from being a die-hard German nationalist to a Soviet super spy? To figure that out, we've got to go all the way back to the trenches of World War I. Before everything changed, Richard Sorge was pretty much exactly what you'd expect a young German man of his time to be. He later said his own views were unmistakably nationalist and imperialist. He couldn't wait to join the German army and go fight for the Kaiser. But the war just shattered him, and I mean that literally and figuratively. Shrapnel took 3 of his fingers and broke both of his legs so badly he'd have a limp for the rest of his life. But the deepest wounds, those were to his beliefs. So as he's recovering in the hospital, he starts to see the whole war as completely meaningless. He starts reading Karl Marx, he's influenced by the father of a nurse he became friends with, and boom, he becomes a full-blown, fervent communist. By 1929, he gets recruited into the Red Army's 4th Department, the GRU, Soviet Military Intelligence. His new bosses in Moscow had a mission for him, and let's be honest, it was an almost suicidally dangerous one. Build the perfect cover and worm his way into the very heart of the Axis powers. The mission they handed him was just audacious, almost unbelievable. Sorge, a guy with known communist ties, was supposed to go back to Germany, join the actual Nazi party, and act so loyal that they'd send him to Tokyo as their trusted journalist. And his real job? Figure out what Japan was planning to do to the Soviet Union. And if you want to know how committed this guy was, get this. Sorge was a legendary hard-partying drinker. But to build his Nazi cover in German beer halls, he quit drinking completely. He was terrified of one single slip of the tongue. He was so successful that Joseph Goebbels himself attended his farewell dinner when he left for Japan. So in Tokyo, he crafts this persona of a hard-drinking, womanizing Nazi journalist, the ultimate insider playboy. But it was all an act. Behind the scenes, he was Ramsay, the cold, calculating spy master, building an intelligence network from the ground up. And his press pass, this was his golden ticket. Being the correspondent for Germany's most respected newspaper, the Frankfurter Zeitung, gave him incredible access. He quickly became the go-to guy for all the German diplomats who couldn't make heads or tails of Japanese politics. And his methods were absolutely ruthless. He didn't just befriend the German ambassador, Huguenot, he became his best friend. Then he seduced Ott's wife, who started copying secret documents for him. His influence got so huge that they literally gave him his own desk at the embassy, and he was often asked to draft the very same diplomatic cables that Ott was sending back to Berlin. This incredible, unprecedented access allowed Sorge to deliver 2 pieces of intelligence that would fundamentally change the entire course of World War II. First up, the big one, the warning that could have saved the Soviet Union from absolute disaster. He sent a radio message to Moscow with a shockingly precise warning. The German attack will start in the last part of June. And in his next reports, he got even more specific about the date. And the result? Just like we heard from Stalin's own mouth, the warning was completely, totally ignored. On June 22, 1941, Hitler's armies poured across the border, and the Red Army was caught in a catastrophic surprise attack. But Sorge wasn't done. And his second piece of intel? This one would be even more important. At this point, the German armies are closing in on Moscow, and Stalin's biggest fear is a 2-front war. What if Japan attacks from the east? Sorge sent a definitive report back to Moscow. Japan had decided to strike south against the United States and the British Empire, not north against the USSR. The Eastern Front, he said, was safe. And this time, Stalin listened. He took a massive gamble. He pulled his elite, battle-hardened Siberian divisions from the east and threw them into the defense of Moscow. These fresh troops were the deciding factor. They stopped the German advance cold and handed Hitler's army its first major defeat of the war. Sorge had just delivered one of the most critical pieces of intelligence in history. He'd saved Moscow. You'd think he'd be a hero, right? Well, as his spy ring finally started to unravel, the very country he served just abandoned him completely. In October 1941, just 1 month after his greatest triumph, it all came crashing down. The Japanese secret police closed in, arresting Sorge and his whole network. The Japanese actually offered to trade him in a prisoner exchange, but the Soviets flat out denied he ever worked for them. They said they didn't know him. He was a ghost. After 3 years in prison, he was hanged. But even facing death, Sorge was incredibly proud of his work. He told his captors that the way he had infiltrated the German embassy, that it was an achievement having no equivalent in history. And you know what? He wasn't wrong. For 20 years. That's how long the Soviet Union, the country he literally helped save, pretended he didn't even exist. It wasn't until 1964 that they finally came clean, posthumously declaring him a hero of the Soviet Union. So, what do we make of a man like Richard Sorge? Was he a traitor to Germany, the country where he was born? Was he a hero of the Soviet Union, the ideology he chose to die for? Or was he something else? Maybe just the single most effective and most consequential spy of the entire Second World War?